Hey guys, we are starting today on page 374. One of the last things we talked about is we talked about Gandhi and we talked about the civil rights movement is underway, the desegregating of schools or whatnot. Couple of people that I want to mention during this time period, famous North Carolinians. One of the most famous North Carolinians in terms of education and just an ambassador for the state would be a man named Terry Sanford. Terry Sanford is going to be, he's the president of Duke University for several years, from 1969 to 1985. He becomes a U.S. Senator, and he does a lot for the state of North Carolina. He's a great governor. He starts the community college system. He gets that going. He includes educational programs. It includes boosts for teachers' salaries or whatnot. So he does a lot. At a eulogy when he was at his funeral, somebody recognized him as, quote, the eternal Boy Scout. He was a good guy. So at sort of a state level right now in 1960, that's the time period that we are talking about. We're talking about 1960 at the state level. You have him as the governor of North Carolina, and then none other than John F. Kennedy is going to be elected as president of the United States. He is a young liberal Massachusetts senator who called for a new frontier of better wages, more aid to education, and new programs to help the poor. Obviously, also he's going to be very instrumental in the civil rights movement. During this time in the 60s, you really were grouped into, there were three different political parties. You were a conservative. Most of the people of the Deep South were conservatives. They were also known as segregationists. They wanted no part of the desegregation of schools. They wanted things to stay the way that they were. You had liberals who were people that wanted social change. They wanted civil rights legislation. They wanted to spend more money on education. And then you had a group of people that were sort of in the middle, and they would have been the moderates. They usually steered away from issues on race and just focused most of their energy on on poverty and education, which are both of which are just big things during this time period. Civil rights, poverty, and education. Unfortunately, as we've seen several times in the past 100 years, there's going to be a resurgence again of the Klan. It says that during this time, more than 6,000 North Carolinians joined the Klan. Tens of thousands of others started Klan rallies over different places of the state or in different places of the state. You can see a good picture there on 375, just this homemade sign that someone put beside the road, 100 yards, take a right, and there's a Klan rally and a cross burning. So these were just very integral parts of some people's lives. There's just a lot of racist and bigotry during the 60s, and we're about to get to the point to where a lot of that is going to come to a halt, and obviously with John F. Kennedy and what he did for the country, and we're going to talk about Martin Luther King in a little bit. Some African Americans they fought against civil rights in ways that weren't so good, and probably one of the very few African Americans that encouraged violence as a method to fight back was a really controversial character named Robert Williams. You can see a picture of him on 375. He often encouraged blacks to carry guns and use them for self-defense. He actually wound up and had to leave the state, and is exiled and winds up in Cuba and starts a Cuban radio station. But anyway, not all the times were rallies peaceful. Sometimes, African Americans, they fought back too, and rightly so. They had been suppressed for so long. Turning to page 376, these little protests and movements, they start all over everywhere. There's even a little town that's just north of Greenville called Williamston. Some of you may know where Williamston is. Black people started protesting there. They started sit-ins there. They started going and demanding tickets for white seats in the movie theaters. There were ads. High school students would join in ads, and you can see on page 377 there, don't buy anything in stores downtown, uptown, across town, or around town. Don't buy anything in stores that does not respect you as an equal human being. So people are just people are fed up with this. And civil rights is well on the way. So protests are going on all across the South. 378, this is sort of where we'll finish up. From the time that you were in grade school, you've learned about Martin Luther King. This page of interest on 378, 379, it speaks about his march on Washington, August 28th, 1963. Several people went to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington. More than 250,000 people from around the country, including 50,000 whites, went to Washington, D.C. to show their support of the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. And everybody has heard of I Have a Dream. Everybody's familiar with parts of that speech. So I do want you to know about that. Know about the March on Washington, August 28th, 1963. Happened there in Washington, D.C. There's a great picture. All of you have been there. I took you there on your D.C. field trip. You can see right there, just right there at the monument there in Washington. Moving right along. Give me a second. And by the way, too, I talk pretty fast. You guys send me any emails, or if you have any questions about anything, let me know. I know this is all, for me, it's a learning curve, just trying to figure all of this out. I do want to talk about the federal government and their role in civil rights for a little bit. A couple of last things. Civil rights became a particular concern for Attorney General Robert Kennedy, who was President Kennedy's brother. And he began to hire top attorneys for the Justice Department Civil Rights Division. Not until Robert Kennedy sent a force of U.S. Marshals to protect the demonstrators could freedom rides, which were entirely legal, continue. So I want you to know about what the Freedom Riders did. When a bus that held an integrated group of Freedom Riders reached Montgomery, Alabama, a mob beat them almost to death before policemen intervened. So Freedom Riders, that became a big thing. We talked about President Kennedy a little bit. We talked about what happened to him. President Kennedy, his presidency was cut short when he was assassinated in Dallas, Texas in November of 1963. As he rode through the streets in a convertible, waving at gathered crowds, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald shot him from the 6th floor of a nearby building. No one was able to question Oswald why he shot the president, because he was shot 2 days later. Kennedy was the 4th American president to be assassinated. His successor is going to be Lyndon B. Johnson. He's a Texan. And the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 is going to be signed into effect. And what the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 finally does is it outlaws employment discrimination and discrimination in public places, and gave the federal government a role in desegregating the schools. So this is really what's going to get the ball rolling to desegregate the schools. There's a picture on 381 of Lyndon Johnson signing this vote. This was actually the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So civil rights is well underway. This will be a good place for us to stop today. Your homework or your assignment from yesterday is on RenWeb. And again, miss you guys. Hope everybody is doing well. And if you have any questions, give me a call. See you guys soon. There's Grace. Say hey, Grace.
Hello.
Bye. There's Garrett. Say hey, Garrett.
Hey.
All right. Hope you guys are doing well. Bye.